So why exactly is Tomb Raider a failure? What did it not bring to the table? Sure, it changed up a lot of the original gameplay mechanics. I mean, what we had before was very different, very archaic. But what the Tomb Raider reboot, brought to the table was just a bunch of recycled mechanics from other third person shooters, action games, and the like. There's nothing really that revolutionary about it. It's a very visually appealing game, but outside of the linear environments and stuff to do that's just kind of thrown in there, there's really not much of a game. All the characters are cardboard cutouts. Laura Croft herself isn't particularly that interesting, and to be honest, there's nothing about the game that's really that appealing. Of course, when I say not very appealing, I'm talking about like the core actual gameplay. The amount of options and things that you can turn on and adjust, and the visual options alone are staggering. There's a lot of stuff in here. Not necessarily stuff that's that amazing or relevant or, this shit here. I mean, I suppose, if you really, really want to pump it up. But the point is, outside of the sound design and the visuals, the game itself is kind of empty, vacuous. I've already completed the game. I don't feel like going back through and going through all the extra temples and things. They're just little tiny levels contained inside of the main hubs, and there's nothing really that interesting to find in them. There's treasure and maybe logs, journals, and that's pretty much it. I mean, outside of the introduction of the game, mind you, it was a pretty good introduction to everything you were going to be involved in. That's pretty much all there is to it. There's nothing else that's really there. By the time you get to the ending, you just want it to be over. You don't really want to play or find out anything about the character or what she's doing or who she's trying to save or help or whatever. In fact, what you're really left with is this vacuous experience that kind of lacks in every way that's important. You have a lot of elements here that seem to work together, but the game isn't challenging. The game isn't really full of any kind of depth. There's a hunting kind of mini game to add experience, but it doesn't really add anything. It adds to the pointless upgrade system for weapons that you don't need upgraded because the game is not challenging enough, or does it have AI that's difficult enough or smart enough or complex enough to actually present much of a challenge. I suppose you could make some arguments that, outside of all this, the game is still good, right? I mean, with everything that you can do in the game, there's got to be something redeeming. But there's not. There's just kind of you playing as a very disconnected player with a character that has no arc, nothing really interesting about them, trying to accomplish something on an island that seems inspired by shows like Lost or other older games that are better. I'm not going to make any sort of defense about the original Tomb Raider games because I honestly am not a fan. And it's not really their fault. It's just the way they're presented. They're not really the smartest games out there. They're very challenging, kind of risk-reward games. And I find that kind of gameplay, once again, rather archaic and frustrating. It's very trial and error. And the puzzles aren't exactly deep in that game either. They're certainly not deep here. It usually involves you jumping, maybe, using a particular utility device like the rope arrows or something to do something. And that involves opening a door or getting a switch to move, or, you know what I mean. Tomb Raider is not a fair reboot. It's a complete reimagining of the franchise, and it's ultimately going to lead towards just kind of this same recycled shit. And I am really tired of seeing that in a game. Given the length of the game, the length is decent. You have about a 7 to 8 hour campaign. with some interesting, you know, thrill rides, I suppose. Like, you know, funny moments like this. Indeed. What the hell? You guys, you had that, guys. I don't know what you were thinking. Yes, also enemies respawn when you come back to old areas, which is nonsensical after the main story has kind of gone through its system. Doesn't really make any sense at all, but then again, this is a video game. I guess I shouldn't be too stern. Like I said, the actual campaign, fairly short. You have a huge hub at your disposal to go through, which looks fairly large, but I mean, it's got the same problem as Dead Space, where you really only have a few areas that you go to, even though the ship is massive. And then you end up kind of going back through those areas and unlocking different areas you couldn't reach before in an effort to progress the storyline. Things pretty much stay the same even after you've beaten the game and you've seen the ending. Even unlocking optional tombs, I mean, all you're doing at this point is maybe unlocking maybe some more concept art, some other stuff that's not particularly fascinating. See, look. When you look at the map, it looks so huge. Look at all these areas. I mean, it's just huge. I mean, amazing, right? But then, you know, you actually travel these areas and they're fairly small and they're linear, and really all you can do is complete kind of bogus objectives with really little incentive. I don't understand how this happened. I'm not saying it's the worst thing ever. It's just not engaging. It's not engaging to a player. Outside of action sequences alone, there's nothing about the game that's engaging, really. And those are very short bursts of things going on. You know, once again, it's kind of schlocky. You get thrown into situations very early on where you're, rolling down a hill, avoiding a plane from crashing into you, the parts of a plane crashing into you. It's absolutely fascinating, right? I mean, oh boy, there's some more guys around here. Hope they didn't hear me. That would be very bad, right? Because then I'll have to suddenly fight them or something. Which is also another aspect that's not particularly fun. Enemy combat is, well, not hard. It's not hard and it's boring. It's boring when enemies just come at you like they're on a suicide mission. I mean, who charges at a woman holding a shotgun or a woman holding a machine gun? Who does that? Oh, that's what that does. I'd actually never used that during the main game. Amazing. Oh, I actually got hit, and it doesn't matter. You see, this is the problem. You have rejuvenating health. You have weapons that are overpowered after a few upgrades. You have enemies that lack any sort of self-preservation or charm or cleverness. Everything. There's nothing in this game. And I almost feel like people would play this game for the graphics alone, the TressFX technology, which is pretty gorgeous looking, I suppose. It has taken at least 3 years for me to actually get a video card that can run TressFX without any issues. So I guess that is an accomplishment, right? I mean, where would we be if we couldn't have one particular visual option that was available all of a sudden to us? It doesn't really add anything to the gameplay. It's about as empty as physics. So, I mean, what else is there to the game? Outside of the linear levels, and mind you, the linear levels are well designed. I mean, you don't get turned around. There are some mysterious areas of the game. There is this part, which, honestly, I always wonder what would happen. Oh, you just die. Okay, well, that solves that problem. Tomb Raider is going to always be that game that basically mimicked everything else before its time. It took a lot of what didn't work in, or well, I should say, what did work in games like Drake's Misfortune, Dead Space, Gears of War, any third person shooter, action shooter you can think of. It mixes a lot of elements, supernatural elements, which at least that's a redeeming feature. I mean, I guess, because they did keep it within some of the initial concepts that were presented by the original Tomb Raider games. Now, once again, I did mention I'm not really a big fan of any of the Tomb Raider games, and it shouldn't really change my opinion here because it's been so long since we've had anything like Tomb Raider or even with the main character involved. And at least she looks like a friggin' human being. I mean, look at that. She looks like a fucking human being. There's a lot of care was put into making her look like a believable person. And that's the problem. She's not. She's not a believable person. She's visually appealing. That's all there is to it. She doesn't have a character. She's just a thing that the player uses that sometimes kills other things. That's her character. Or sometimes she'll get killed. Now, the deaths are absolutely gruesome. I'm not even going to bother showing them. Because once again, as I mentioned, or well, I will mention, the gore is overdone. The gore is ridiculous. It doesn't even make any sense in some portions of the game, and I can't understand this. It's not like they straight up rape Lara Croft in any sequence here, but they do everything else to her, pretty much. I mean, fuck, she initially falls on a fucking piece of metal. God, can't even, rhubarb? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, she falls on one of those for some reason, even though you can't see it until it, finally plunges into her spleen. Then she's like limping around for the first hour of the game, and it doesn't make any sense, because I'm like, holy shit, who could survive that? I mean, literally, who could possibly survive that for, with all the other shit on this island? Come on, bacteria, guys. I'm sure there's some doctors around here that know exactly what I mean. So this room apparently has some issues with, I'm not really sure. There's a few parts of the map in different areas that have some serious performance issues, and I still, to this day, I can't figure it out. Shantytown, in particular, has some major issues, and I guess you just need to shell out for those for that Intel processor and NVIDIA graphics card or whatever, just to get it working, sufficiently. The areas are well designed. Like I said, they kept the supernatural feeling from the original games, but that's all there is to it. Just the character's name, some of the settings,